stepson took this picture several years ago. This is just a 4-inch hummingbird feeder that's on a little stake that goes into pots. It's the first of my small spaces concessions. This is what's good on a deck, is having places where you can see things close up. And that's one of the secrets of gardening in small spaces, is getting the close-up view. Okay, so thinking about small spaces. One objective is not just thinking about small spaces, but sharpening your gardening skills. Overall, whether you're dealing with a small yard, and this is the picture of Donna Crozier's house in a mobile home park. Donna Crozier is a Master Gardener Emeritus, who was the originator of this slide presentation, and she inspired me many years ago to take it over from her. I still use a few of her pictures, but I have to credit Donna because, in fact, Donna was a long time volunteer of LaGrange Library. She doesn't do much of that anymore, I don't think, but she was also a really fine presenter for the Master Gardener Speakers Bureau, and I walk in her shoes. So you could either have a small yard like hers in a mobile home park, or the townhouse, or the tight little lots in cities. You can have a balcony or a porch, whether it's covered or uncovered. You can have a suburban deck like so many of us do in LaGrange. And by the way, I didn't introduce myself, but I was a resident of East Fishkill until 2 years ago. I was had a house in a suburban neighborhood in East Fishkill, Hopewell Junction. But I retired. My husband and I moved a couple years ago up to Massachusetts to be closer to our lake home, which is what you see on the right, the deck in our lake house. And my sister, and I always say this in this presentation, Ellen, my sister says that I'm the only person she knows to paint the Adirondack chairs on her deck the same color as her flowers. But there's a purpose to that. And my first presentation in graduating from Master Gardener program was called The Power of Purple. You'll see that in various parts of this presentation. You could have a patio that's either, like on the right, an extension of your little patio connected to the house. And this is Donna's patio garden, where she planted a swath of things around trees that are near her patio to kind of connect everything to her house. Or you could do like Donna did here and put a little patio as a little oasis in the lawn. You could have your walkway plantings, and that sweet Tudor on the left is not my house, but the blue stone path on the right did belong to my Hopewell Junction house. It was the front walk coming up to the door. And what you see in the foreground, I must disclaim, it is a Japanese barberry. Again, I love the dark purple foliage for its contrast, but you don't put a barberry, even though it's now and on the invasives list in both Massachusetts and in New York State. You can't even buy them, but you don't want to put something thorny on a front walk. That's one of the secrets of small spaces, is you don't have a lot of space to move. It could be one of your pocket gardens, and in the magazines you'll see a lot of articles calling out what they're calling pocket gardens now. It's just a space, in this case one that catches some light, and you say, I want to define a space in that light because I can grow things that aren't shade in that light, and that's nice. Or even a very large space that you can divide into small rooms. And this is a picture of the massive gardens at Mohonk Mountain House, if you've ever been there. Beautiful gardens there. And they have them divided. This year there was or the year that I took this, it was a photo. We were doing a field trip of the year that they had Andrew, who was the head gardener until recently, you can see these little structures in the middle of each garden. This is a Crayola crayon, if you will, with a yellow top. So this was the yellow garden, this was the red garden in front, and this is the pink garden. And that was the theme of his little rooms back then. He had themes to divide up that massive property, which was an idea. But it all starts with thinking small. And when I took Donna's original presentation, I had to organize my own ideas to add to this. And I used 5 categories of principles. Think realistic, think downsizing, think vertical, think containers, and think focal point, which we'll have some fun with at the end. So number one, think realistic. This is the, this isn't the fun part, but if you've got limited real estate, you really do have to plant the right plant in the right place, if you will. And Donna used to say you need tools, quote, outside the bag. But first it takes planning, and it takes discipline, and often it takes tough love, meaning some things just have to go. Some things don't work, and you don't have room for things that don't work. So that realism is important. But then the tools that Donna referred to outside the bag, your tape measure, pencil, notepad, graph paper, camera, these are things that help you plan. Tape measure, by the way, I don't use anymore, because if you can figure out how in toe to heel stepping, I call it stepping out your plots. If you can figure out by putting your foot one in front of the other, and my feet are the size that if I leave an inch between my front foot and my back foot, I have a foot. I can count the feet, 1, 2, 3 as I step. And so I don't use a tape measure anymore. So you can really bring down the number of tools in your bag, but do add a pencil and a notepad to your tool bucket, because we're going to talk about taking notes. You have to, the things that you forget. The older we get, the more we forget. But really, even with a small amount of real estate, there's an overload level that will overflow into your notepad. And if you've got it, you learn to depend on it. Graph paper we'll talk about in a second. And she always said camera. But you know what we have now, which is our cell phones. And if you can have your cell phone, women don't have pockets in their pants a lot. If you don't have a pocket for your cell phone when you go out to the garden, have a fanny pack, or have an armband, one of those arm holsters for your camera, for your phone, because your phone is your camera. And the camera is important for realism. It has to do with a perspective that your naked eye doesn't catch. So when you make a plan, you want to draw a map, and it can be as simple as this one that Donna provided here. You notice that I'm going to use my cursor here. You notice the compass rose, which tells you you really at least need to mark where north is, because light becomes important to your planning. You want to keep notes or journal. And the reason is, whether it's just a little spiral notebook and pencil that's tucked into your gardening bag, you want to know what worked, what didn't work as the season goes on. And you forget what goes on early in the season, particularly with your bulbs early in the season or late in the season, when the leaves drop and you can see the structure of your shrubs. You can see, oh, I need to make a note to prune my hydrangea in early spring. Those notes are important. And lists become very important. In one of my classes, we actually put together a notebook with tabbed sections. Desired plants. When you go to the grocery store, what happens when you don't have a list? When you have a small piece of real estate to garden on, you cannot afford to come home with plants that you don't have plans for. You know what happens when you're walking around with a plant in your hand saying, where do I plant this? Where do I plant this? It sounded great in the nursery. By the way, that's another reason why it's good to have a camera, a cell phone with you, because if you see things in the nursery that are not on your list, take a picture of the plant tag. Just have that and actually make a note of it when you get home, and take a look at it and decide where it fits into your plans. But don't be adopting babies without places for them. Yeah, I'm talking to a couple of master gardeners in the group. Pat, we do that too, don't we? Do as I say, not as I do. But you got to have room. Another list that you can make is obstacles and challenges, whether it be light, whether it be light issues, whether it be soil issues, deer marauders, where are the deer attacking your stuff, challenges that come out of nowhere. It seems like you have a neighbor that installs a patio or a driveway where there wasn't one before, and all of a sudden you've got standing water downhill on your property, and you've got to make note of it and do something about it. But you can't do something about it if you don't remember it's there. And of course, your off-season reminders, especially about bulbs early in the season and pruning needs later in the season when the foliage is off your plants. Just as examples, those seasonal transitions are really helped by having things written down. So now we get into some pretty pictures, because the second section is to think downsizing. Everybody thinks dwarves are wonderful things. We're going to talk about the good and the bad things about some kinds of dwarves. So varieties that are naturally smaller. And we're also going to talk a little bit about pruning the tall varieties early in the season for doing what's called right sizing. It might be tall and floppy, but you can do something about that. So let's first talk about dwarves and downsized varieties. And I'm going to start with a cautionary tale, that picture on the left. If you're a big gardener, you might recognize that that's Joe Pyeweed. It used to be called Eupatorium. I can't remember what the new name is since it's been recategorized. Maybe Joyce does. But the Joe Pyeweed is a,
maybe?
Yeah, that's it. Eutropium. That's it. And you can see by the side, that guy is not a small man. Joe Pyeweed's natural height is like 6 feet. We love Joe Pyeweed. It blooms late in the season. It's a great pollinator plant, particularly for butterflies that love that broad landing place on top. And the color is gorgeous late in the season when everything else starts to really get raggedy looking. But it's big. And so when I first, this is 25 years ago when we built our house in Hopewell, I installed Joe Pyeweed. I love Joe Pyeweed. So I installed it by our patio, and then said, oh my, this is too big, way too big. And then they came out with Little Joe. Little Joe is the quote dwarf. It sounds dwarfy, doesn't it, Little Joe? I planted it. It was 5 feet instead of 7 feet. And it spread like crazy. Little Joe, it was not. And then they came out with Baby Joe. This is a proven winner's shot of Baby Joe. By the way, I cut bait at that point. I put the Little Joe out in the edge of the yard. It really should be a distance appeal type plant as opposed to a close-up appeal plant by the patio. Anyway, it's got scale, it's big. So I put it at the edge of the yard and I gave up at that point. But then they came out with Baby Joe. I will tell you, here in Massachusetts, where I live now, I live about a mile from the Berkshire Botanical Garden, and I'm a volunteer tour guide. And late last year, or actually 2 years ago, 2 summers ago, because there were no tours this year, somebody in a garden club group said to me, what is that? And I said, oh, that's Joe Pyeweed. Don't you recognize it? And she said, yes, but this tag, and she was up at, Berkshire Botanical Gardens tags everything. They have really nice garden stakes telling you what the plants are. And she was leaning down and she said, but it says Eupatorium Baby Joe. And I looked up, this was a 6-foot plant. It was probably 15 years old. Some plants will achieve or will revert back to the parent, but will achieve their size, even though they're called dwarves. Perovskia little spire. Oh my goodness, no, it's not little. Most of the nepidas are not, even though they say things like little meow, cat's paws. No, it's just as big as, maybe it's 80% as big as the original. So you do have to worry about even what you see on the tags, but do read the tags. This second example is a Deutzia, and I had a beautiful fragrant Deutzia on my front walk, which just got big and floppy, and this one works. This is Deutzia gracilis Nico. Nico is only about 18 inches, 2 feet high. Nice little well-kept mounds. They might gracefully put out longer vase-shaped branches that you can either clip back, or you can even put a rock on them and have them root and cut them off. And I have new plants, new Nico plants because of that. It did when they hybridize, sometimes when they hybridize for downsizing, they give up something. This is frequent. And sometimes, in this case, it was fragrance. These small Deutzias do not have fragrance, but they are little flowering wonders. Another one is Chardonnay Pearls. Another one is a hybrid that's actually pink called Yuki Cherry Blossom. They're all wonderful for front of the border and for walkways and for small spaces. By the way, I actually added to this presentation today. I have a plant list that I'm going to ask Anna, would you mind tomorrow sending out the plant list that I send you to the group? Because that way you don't have to make as many notes for the plants varieties that I'm showing today. And they're going to be quite a
Absolutely.
few. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have to update that, so I won't get it out until tomorrow. The third picture you see is a perennial called Bleeding Heart, and many of you have this. This is a wonderful early spring shade plant that is shrub-like. It gets so big, and it has those beautiful hanging, dripping hearts. But it also has, by August, just nothing but yellow stalks and a big hole in your garden. And unless you have big gardens, it's hard to compensate for a shrub like for a perennial like that. But there's also a bleeding heart that is the whole family of bleeding hearts. In fact, it's Dicentra. The all bleeding hearts were called Dicentra until recently. The big one on top has now been reclassified as a Lampropcampnos, but the smaller bleeding hearts are called the fringed bleeding hearts. They're Dicentra eximia. They're tiny. The bleeding hearts themselves are not as detailed and nuanced, but by golly, they bloom for a long time, and they rebloom and they rebloom. They take sun or shade. They will sometimes make babies that are easy to pull up if you don't want them. They have nice little neat mounds of foliage and a long flowering period, like I said. That's a winner. And then on the right, you see your big butterfly bushes. And we, like our butterflies and bees, love butterfly, and hummingbirds love butterfly bushes, but sometimes they are just too big. Over the years, there have been many tries at downsizing them. I'll tell you the one that's working for me right now is a Walter's Garden one that actually is available from the Master Gardener plant sale, which is always the weekend before Mother's Day. If you can go up to Millbrook to pick up this year, we're going to have an online plant sale. And I don't think, Joyce, that we have Lavender Cupcake on our list again this year, but we have lots of others. And they will be listed on the Cornell website, which you can just Google Cornell or CCEDC.org. But right. you can also just Google Cornell extension Duchess plant sale. And by early May, the plant list for our plant sale will be up.
I think we ordered Magenta Munchkin.
Magenta Munchkin. See, there's another one. So what's working is probably, I'd call them the 4 foot right-sized buddleias, the butterfly bushes that are big enough to entertain a lot of pollinators, and also have a big enough crown to survive our winters in zone 5-6. But smaller and more shapely and more contained than the big old buddleias. On the other hand, you're going to go to the nursery and you might see something like this one that's called Blue Chip. And like you see in the checkout lane of the supermarket, when you don't have it on the list, but you feel a chocolate hankering coming on, you might just feel like getting that blue chip. But I will tell you, this is one of my earliest presentations, years of giving this presentation, I have not yet run into anybody who's had a blue chip for more than one winter, to survive more than one winter. And it's because I think they downsize it to the point, this is a 2 foot version instead of a 4 foot version. And I think that's just too small a crown to survive our winters. I don't know what would happen if you tried to overwinter it in a container, but it certainly wouldn't work outdoors. So be careful is one of the cautions. Now, what I added was some native shrubs. We have learned since I first did this presentation how much better for our wildlife and for our overall environment native shrubs are. And we encourage you to look at a lot of native shrubs, but because they're great for pollinators, they're much easier to fit into your landscape without the usual inputs of watering and fertilizing and pesticides to keep those exotics going. Natives don't need all that typically, but they can often be big woodland plants, big woodland shrubs that challenge your smaller home landscapes. So I used 4 examples here of things to look for in your nurseries and ask for them if they don't have them, because they should be getting more natives in. Fothergilla, you may not have heard of Fothergilla, but it's one of the earliest flowering native shrubs. These little bottle brushes stand up and appear often before the foliage comes in, really early in the spring. We're talking April, and they are fragrant. That's great, but this is a huge shrub. So what I'm going to tell you is Fothergilla gardeniae is a 2 to 3 foot version. And again, it has the same blue toned, typically blue toned foliage. That's another nice thing. And also I like to put it next to the entry door because of your house, because it's not just a good foundation plant, but it's fragrant. And in those early days of spring, it's nice to come in your door and have something nice to smell. And then in fall, you get this fabulous, like a lot of natives, fabulous fall foliage. And then we have, to the right of that, we have winterberry. And we love winterberries, but they can be not just big, but they're kind of ornamentally not significant. They don't do much for you ornamentally until the berries come in. So you don't typically want to take up all that space with a shrub that isn't going to be, have a wow factor for most of the year. But you do want those berries because, by the way, they are the best berries for birds. The highest fat content berries of any berry producing shrub or tree in our area. And typically the birds don't eat them until later in the season because they know that those are the things that will carry them through the winter, into winter better. So they stay on the shrub for quite a while, which is nice. So look at some little ones. Little red sprite gets to be 3 feet tall or so. I just bought three little winterberries called orange goblin or gold. There's also gold goblin, I think. The goblin series are 2 footers, even 2 to 3 footers, and the berry production is just as much as reliable as with the big ones. The third one you see here is a deer villa. Deer villa is actually, the common name is bush honeysuckle, but it's not the non-native honeysuckle that's on the invasives list. This is a honeysuckle that has performs with beautiful fall color, and it performs in places with standing water. It is very tolerant of water log conditions, boggy conditions, but they can get enormous. So I just got a deer villa in the Kodiak series called Kodiak Black. The Kodiaks are smaller. They're 3 to 4 foot shrubs, and they do pretty well in the shade as well as the sun. They're not known for their, there's no big flowering period, but the fall, again, is good fall color. But in the meantime, with these darker leaf deer villas, you can get a lot of contrast in your garden, in your small garden. And finally, one of our favorites, Clethra, which is called Summer Sweet. And they can be big and they can colonize. They can be big, like 5 to 6 feet, and they can colonize, which means they can spread and produce copses of as opposed to a single shrub. They can become multi-stemmed shrub copses. But a small one, like hummingbird, can be 3 feet tall, and you can shape it like this. They typically aren't. This is a proven winner's shot. Again, it's very, very pretty and shapely. You have to shape them up. Their little plumes go every which way, but they bloom in midsummer, like July, mid to late July, when everything else is starting to look tired. Here come these beautiful, and they produce blooms in the shade or in the sun and in standing water. They're also good rain garden plants. But they're that period of time when there aren't a lot of flowering shrubs helping out, so you get all your pollinators around one shrub. Be careful. It'll attract a lot of bees, but boy, are they happy. Even your big hardy hydrangea types can be downsized and reliably. And I give you some examples here of 4 different hydrangea types. These do not include your macrophyllas, which are the hydrangea, the blue mop heads. They're not as reliable bloomers in our area. In fact, I have a whole presentation on hydrangeas because our most commonly asked question among master gardeners in our events is, why doesn't my hydrangea bloom? And people are talking about the blue mop heads, but these are 4 other hydrangeas that do very well in our zone. And I'll tell you, I'll sing their praises for you, even without having the whole presentation. The first one we have there is your hydrangea, your hydrangea paniculata. Paniculatas are the old PGs. They used to be called PGs because they were paniculata grandifloras, and that was it. That's all you could get in nurseries decades ago. But you still see them in cemeteries, for example, cemeteries and public lots around the Northeast, because they're so reliable and so hardy. But the newer ones, you can see the pink tones. I think this is Pinky Winky. The newer ones age, they come in white, but then they age to pink, and they stay on aging, and new ones coming in white. So you see the variation between the whites and the pinks all the way into fall. The paniculatas can be, however, very big. This Pinky Winky is probably 6 to 7 feet tall. They can even be 8 feet tall. However, there are lots of other choices. This is Bobo. Bobo is one of my favorites because it's a great foundation plant, meaning it's just right for under windows. It's about 4 feet tall, doesn't get, maybe gets up to 5 feet tall, but it's great for under your windows. It also, you know, hydrangeas are fragrant, so it's nice to have under your window for that reason too. But this Bobo will get just as pink. These are brand new blooms you're seeing here, but they age to pink, just like the other kinds of paniculatas. The second one you see here is another kind of paniculata. It's called Quickfire. And Quickfire is named that because it was hybridized to have red stems, dark red stems, and to have darker red blooms. So it's a little different than the main paniculata family. It blooms maybe early June as opposed to mid-June. It's not that much earlier, but it's a great plant. But it is a 5 foot to 6 foot tall plant in its maturity. However, there's little Quickfire, which in my garden, you see it looks pink. That's because this is a shade garden. Paniculatas really should have a lot of sun. This garden gets about 2 hours of sun. I plugged it in because I didn't have any place else for it. It was one of those plants I was walking around with saying, where do I put it? Where do I put it? Well, I plugged it in just in time to have it flower. This is the first year, by the way, that it came back and flowered like this. It is reliably a 2 to 3 foot plant and a really nice little shape. And floriferous, again, comes in white, but ages pink to red if you're giving it sun. This is a different kind of, these last two are native hydrangeas. This one's called a smooth hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens. It's this is the standard hydrangea arborescens for years. It's Annabelle. You can still find Annabelle in nurseries. It is a big mop head, and it has those big white blooms. It's a great plant, but it's big, and it will colonize. It will start to spread out and take up more space. You might not have that space. In recent years, they have actually hybridized pinks. They have cultivated a pink arborescens, and in various sizes. This was called Mini Mauvette. I'm trying it out in 2 places. It looks really adorable where it is. Not big flower heads, but again, paniculata is a long bloom from mid-season through fall. And then you have the other native, your oak leaf hydrangea. The big oak leaf hydrangeas also have huge panicles that stand fairly erect. They are probably, they can be 9 inches to a foot long, those panicles, and the leaves are huge. And of course, the plants of a typical hydrangea quercifolia, which is oak leaf hydrangea, can be actually 8 to 10 feet tall, they say. And they get bigger and bigger in terms of the amount of ground space they take up. But there have been some really cool little ones lately. This is my ruby slippers. And let me tell you, this right here is a picture I took last year in the fall, which was her first year. And it was November, it was this time of the year, dark purple. You know, one of the things about quercifolia is the beautiful fall foliage. And those leaves hang on and look gorgeous while everything else is falling apart. This is November. This is this time of the year last year, dark burgundy, dark purple foliage, and those flowers hung on. There were 3 of them actually on that little 2-foot shrub. This year, that shrub is expanded to about 4 foot high and 4 foot wide. It's got today the same dark purple leaves, and it's got a dozen of these plumes, which are still pretty big for a little shrub. So that's one that you want to look at.
And
Quite
Chris,
available too.
And Chris, that's interesting because my, 35-year-old crucifolia, which is huge, it really has gone past its colors now. The flowers are down to the brown, and the leaves have pretty much lost most of their purple and are starting to fall off. So that has
Yes.
lasted for you also a longer season than the standard crucifolia.
And Ruby
Mine was
Slippers is
Snowball.
known for that, by the way. Ruby Slippers is a recent introduction. It is known for that, though, the longevity of its fall color.
Nice.
However, I also have to put in a little disclaimer that quercifolias are very from year to year can be very different. The color can be different. Of your typical oak leaf hydrangeas, your color can be different, and the aging pattern can be different, and the color can be different in the foliage and also in those blooms. Sometimes they age to a bronze. Sometimes they don't get that far before they start falling off. But it depends on the climate, I think, on the year.
Nice.
Okay, I want to give you another caution. Conifers as a family, as a whole category, dwarf conifers are notorious for not staying small. The word dwarf is relative, and what it typically means in conifer country is slow growing. It doesn't mean it's going to stay small. It means it's going to grow slower, but it will still achieve its full height. And you can see at my lake house, my 25-year-old little spires. Now they were either mislabeled or no. All you have to do is visit White Flower Farm, the dwarf conifer garden, which I remember my son, who's 30 now, dragging him around by his hand saying, "We're looking for the dwarf conifer garden. Darn it. I don't know. Do you see it, Brian?" He was 8 at the time or 7, and saying, "Okay, help mommy find it." He found it. It had a sign, but the conifers were about 15 to 20 feet high. And it's because, and the sign actually told you this, that they are small to begin with, but they will achieve height. And so you have to worry about that a little bit if you're talking about small spaces. Have a plan. There are lots and lots of perennials that are actually dwarves, and in the shade in particular, hostas in particular. If you love hostas and you have close-up viewing opportunities around your patio, oh my goodness, my favorite little hosta right now, just because of the shape of the leaves and the size, is called mouse ears, M-O-U-S-E, mouse ears. Oh my goodness. But there are dozens of them that you can fall in love with, and go ahead, because they're very, the little ones are predictably small. And you see to the right, speaking of hostas that aren't small, astilbes is another category that you can get. These pink ones right here are called astilbe chinensis. The Visions line is the one that's most popular. We've got some Visions astilbes in our plant sale coming up, don't we, Joyce? I think the raspberry Visions maybe, and even a smaller one. But over here, you get the smallest of the astilbes. And these can take, by the way, quite a bit of sun. In fact, need a little bit of sun, these small upright astilbes. This one is called astilbe pumila, P-U-M-I-L-A. And you can see that that's not in bloom yet, but you can see the little stalks coming up. This is probably taken in mid-June. These come in the first week of July. They come in later, and it's nice to have that sequence of bloom among your astilbes in the front of the water. By the way, you know how I told you about taking pictures gives you perspective that your naked eye won't catch? This is a good example. When I took this picture for this presentation a few years ago, it wasn't until I put it up on the screen that I said, oh my gosh, I need to divide those hostas because, they'd gotten big And you're used to seeing your hostas right sized in the garden, and you're not even aware that 2 years have gone by and they've gotten huge. My garden doesn't look anything like this now. Let me tell you, they had to go. Actually, they first got divided, and then these had to go. They weren't special enough for this small space. Tough love. What did I say about tough love? Sometimes you need to do it. It's hard for all of us. Now, I'm just going to touch on the subject of right sizing your tall varieties. Some of you know that if you've got mums that come back from year to year, and I hope you do, because they do well in the north if you protect the crowns, meaning that you don't cut them back in the fall. They'll come back in the spring when they break wood, which means that the new growth appears on the around that crown in the spring. That's when you can cut back. Until then, that top growth is protecting the crown, because mums are kind of borderline in terms of our zone. But mums can get tall and lanky, and you end up having to stake things like this, or they take over your garden and you don't really want them to. But if you early in the season prune them, and pruning here is just a term for pinching back, you can pinch back by 1/3 to 1/2 to delay the bloom a little bit, but you're also getting more branching, which means more blooms, and shorter plants, shorter, fuller, denser plants. And this works for a lot of plants. You see phlox on the list. My deer in my yard in Hopewell Junction used to prune my phlox for me. They would come in the minute the phlox emerged and got to be about 18 inches high. They would come in and nip them back by 1/3, and they would come in bigger and later. And by that time, the deer had a lot of other things to eat and they weren't interested. So they used to prune my phlox for me. The reason why I show this book here, and when I send the plant list out, I also put resources on there, which include this book. This is one of the most popular books among master gardeners. I took a poll for an article I did for Duchess Dirt, and which is a newsletter. If you're not on the list for Duchess Dirt, it's a master gardener newsletter. We love to share it. There are probably 1,700 names on the list now, Joyce. And all you have to do is to Google Duchess Dirt newsletter, and the screen will come up, which tells you how to sign up. It's a monthly email newsletter.
2,100.
How many?
2,093. I rounded it up to 2,100.
Wow. See, I keep
And
selling it.
It's on the website. The only thing that we do with the subscription is we remind people that we just issued a new one.
That's right. We don't use your email
CCEDC.org.
or anything else. Okay. So, but this book is popular because she is, you know that word realistic? She doesn't sing the praises of just anything. If she has it in her, it's a great encyclopedia in the back, but she tells you what's good and what's bad about those plants. She doesn't recommend plants that get out of control. But she also talks a lot about how to control the tall things and to get more flower power out of them and to control their height and their size. So I invite you to get that. By the way, there are newer editions of this book, but if you go on Amazon, this very first edition, or the edition before this, but even this one now you can get for basically the price of postage. You can get a $1 version of this book, you quote used unquote, maybe a library copy or a publisher's extra, and pay for the postage to get it, and it's be 95% as good as the $25 or $30 edition that's new. So go ahead and make sure this is on your shelf.
It's also in the library system.
Oh, I'm so sorry, and I'm talking to a library. Listen, you bet
No
it's in the library
problem.
system.
I just wanted to let people know.
You know what? And I do that actually with all my with a lot of garden books. If I'm not sure, I get it through the library system. And if I think that no, this is one I want to have on my shelf permanently, then I'll buy it. So yes, in the Mid-Hudson Library System, you can get a book from anywhere. But anyway, on to number 3. The third principle is think vertical. And you'll see here, these are actually 3 containers on my deck. They're supposed to distract from the fact that we didn't paint the deck that year. But the 3 containers are on, one's on the table, one's a big pot, and one's a little pot. But you get that vertical advantage. Didn't take up more than 18 inches width-wise, between those chairs, but it, you know, it used vertical space instead. It also can help you balance your designs better to use vertical. And vertical can help you with your distance appeal, optimize your distance appeal. If everything is at ground level, it's not as appealing from your kitchen window. Okay, let's talk about how to do that. Donna actually uses structures like this. So you can use the vertical structures in ways that lift things off the ground and help put color at eye level. This is our demonstration garden, one of our demonstration gardens at Cornell, the Farm and Home Center for Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County, which is in Millbrook on Route 44, just a couple miles east of the Taconic Parkway. Really easy to get there from LaGrange. And you should definitely tour around the demonstration gardens in the spring, all through the season. This was one that I worked on years ago, the one that, if you're disguising what's basically a brick box, which is what we were doing, we did it by making, we made very easy to make rustic trellises out of branches that were 6 feet high, and we attached them to the wall. And then we planted 2 different kinds of vines. We planted clematis, which, as you know, will climb early and bloom in early June, late May, early June. And then this is called hyacinth bean vine, which is Lab is the botanical name, grown from seed, which, you know, has spectacular pea-like blooms at the all over, very, very full vines, but it takes all summer for them to get there. But if you've got the clematis doing the job early on, and then while it goes by, you've got the lab coming up and overtaking it, they work kind of cooperatively to give you your vertical coverage. You can think vertical for corners, and you can make a corner vertical. You can make this vertical ascension using rocks with putting soil into the rocks, plugging in soil into the rocks, and alpine plantings, for example, inside those pockets. And you've got a nice little corner. You can also build up your own vertical corner using fencing. There was a place in my neighborhood who had a couple of these defining the corners of their lots. This tick seed coreopsis is probably up on a stump or something, up on a rock, so that they lifted it up out of the corner, but it's probably in a container. But you could also plant a little taller gold black-eyed Susan, like Rebecca lacinata or Rebecca herbstun, which is autumn sun, which are the tall late season black-eyed Susans. That'd be nice in a corner like that.
A question, Chris. If
Yeah.
you raise a perennial like that, do you need to be concerned how well it would overwinter?
Yes, wouldn't we? Good question.
Yeah,
Yes.
because I mean, that's certainly a trick I do with annuals,
Yeah.
but I would have to think about how well it could overwinter.
If you put a perennial into a container for season 1, which is a great idea, then come September, you really should take that perennial out of that container and find a place for it, because it will overwinter better in the ground, and the fall is a good time for it to settle its roots, as long as you continue watering it until the ground freezes, which isn't until December. You think just because the top growth dies back, it doesn't need anything else. Well, that's when it's setting the roots up for surviving the winter. And so you want to keep watering it until the ground freezes. Good question. Back to vertical wall space. Oh my goodness. There was a period, and I think we're past it now, where pallets were being used decoratively. There's a phrase that I think of when I see this, which has to do with, the title of this. So the title of this scene would be "Fighting the Tyranny of Good Taste." Yes, I can hear you chortling, even on Zoom. But, you know, you might apply good taste to, you know, you got this downspout. This is in Tuscany, by the way, so you know there's good taste here. But you are softening the line of that, that homely little downspout using your terracotta containers, which, you know, follow a theme here, which is really nice. You can also use vertical, again, you know, your rustic structures. They're not hard to put together. You're talking about screws and branches, and voila, you've got a place to perch more vertical containers. Similarly, you can actually use a tree in your backyard. If you've got something that you want to disguise beyond that view line, like that big old house next door, and you're sitting on a patio, hang planters at different heights from a branch or branches of trees, and you will get a much nicer thing to look at than looking across the fence at that stucco house. And that brings us to containers, which is our fourth category. Think containers for portable color. I say portable because, and here's my lake house on the left, because, you know, every once in a while, you know what died there? Orange echinacea. Orange echinacea always die. They don't, speaking of hybridizers that have to give up something when they're hybridizing, you take a purple coneflower and you make it orange, something's got to give. And you know what gave? Hardiness. So it didn't come back. And so I put my beloved begonia, cane begonias, angel wing begonias, dragon wing begonias. They make great. This was small because this was probably June. And when I figured out that echinacea was gone, this thing got this big by the end of the season, because begonias in containers can get that big. The dragon wings can get that big. This is just a petunia in a container here, filling in for a shrub that I had to pull. And so, you know, you get the look that you want by plugging things in for a season, or even for part of a season. The middle picture shows once the rhododendrons go by and the dogwoods have bloomed, they're past bloom, you know, you can take that pot with your New Guinea impatient and coleus and just stick it in there. And then later in the season, when there's another hole, you can put it someplace else. That's why I call it portable color. Here on your dock, places where you can't otherwise have a garden. And by the way, here are Adirondack chairs again. And this is on a table between the Adirondack chairs and our dock. My husband seems to think that he should, I don't know, he should be able to put his beer down on a table between the Adirondack chairs. And I go, Adirondack, you know, tables aren't for beer. Tables are for plants to give height. You know why the Adirondack chairs have wide arms? Because that's where you put your beer. Use the tables for plants.
You could put a plant on those arms.
Oh, and that's why I warn him. That's next. You keep complaining, there'll soon be plants on the arms of the chairs. My poor husband. Okay, so we're talking about containers that are really flexible. You can bring your gardens anywhere. Where do you want to spend your time? Whoops. Because for one thing, deer do not spend their time on decks and patios and docks that are raised. They will not go upstairs. They will not go out in a dock. And that's where you can put flowers that otherwise you're worried about deer eating. Even, we'll talk about vegetables next. But I want to give you a couple cautions about container groupings. And these are just visual mostly, because you all know that containers need maintenance, need extra maintenance, watering, fertilizing. Don't let that miracle grow soil. Don't think that's going to last all season, because it's not. It's not going to last through many rainfalls, in fact, because it's going to leach everything out and then you got dead dirt. You have to keep fertilizing containers and deadheading to keep things going. But from the ornamental point of view, you know, a big container that you plant with the classic thriller, filler, spiller. Thriller being like this, on this dock collection, I have my Mystic Dreamer dahlia, which is a dark leaf dahlia, spectacular. And then the filler of the thing is like your petunias that would go around it, and your spiller is like this drapey vine, like a sweet potato vine, Ipomea. But that kind of thriller, filler, spiller combo that you go for in a pot because you're told to do that, if you're getting any distance away from that, that's nice for patio settings where your chairs are right there, or your pool side where your chairs are right there. You're going to enjoy it close up. But from a distance, small things together like that tend to muddy up, and all you see is a brown blob. And so if it's going to be from a distance, consider planting bigger in separate pots. So you're still got your thriller and your filler and your spiller, but they're in a bigger grouping with bigger blotches of color that you can see from a distance. The other thing I want to ask you to do is for the same reason, because too many different things going on tends to muddy up, particularly from a distance. Look chaotic, not look unified or coordinated. So you take one of two things when you're getting your pots together. You either want to use similar plants and colors in your different pots. If you have lots of different kinds of colors and types of pots, use, make the plantings in them more similar when you group them. Or you can, as I have here, courtesy of Ocean State Job Lots, I've got all blue ceramic, cobalt blue ceramic pots, which allows it, that's the unifying coordinator. And I can use lots of different things going on because my pots are coordinated. Containers for vegetables. Really, you don't have a lettuce bowl on your patio table come May in the spring. It's one of the first things you can do to make your, oh, it's so happifying to have this outside your kitchen door, to have a lettuce bowl on your patio table. It's a great, again, if it's up on a deck, your deer aren't going to get it. And you can reach in and grab some lettuce every day. This is Norma Chang, who is a Master Gardener Emeritus in Dutchess County, has a blog called garden2walk.com. She's a longtime cooking teacher in Dutchess County. And she had this wonderful blog. I wonder if she's retired from that, but it's still available online. She had an experiment where she said she ran out of containers. What about just window boxes for planting all these extra Swiss chard plants she had? It worked. It worked. Lots of different containers work for vegetables. And you can, again, put them up on your deck and away from the deer and marauders. But you also should consider reservoir type containers like the Earth Box series for moisture consistency that a lot of crops like tomatoes, for example, need. They don't like to dry out and then get drenched and then dry out and then get drenched. If you've got a reservoir type container, and this is a container that has a watering tube probably behind this leaf, and when you water it, it'll take 4 gallons. Yep, that's it, 4 gallons, as I recall. 4 gallons, which not only lasts a long time for you in terms of not being able to having to water more than once a week if it's in full sun, but it also has those roots reaching down, and you're not doing that top watering thing that makes your tomatoes in particular very prone to disease. You don't want wet foliage with tomatoes. So reservoir containers are another thing that not only bring your vegetables close to your kitchen, but also are good for plants. Herbs, again, grow them near your kitchen door. Kitchen gardens, the thing that's called kitchen gardens, that just means putting things outside that's closer to your kitchen that you can use in your cooking. And herb pots are great. Instead of the basil that we often use for what do we, when you pine nuts and olive oil and cheese with, it's
Pesto.
called pesto. Yes, I'm sorry. The pesto basil is typically Genovese. Thank you, Joyce. It's typically Genovese. But if you get something called spicy globe basil, it fits in a pot much nicer. And they're littler leaves, and they're the great flavor, not as much chopping. And you can just take a few of them for your caprese salad, great container basil. Another great container basil is their Thai basil, because these purple flowers are gorgeous. And they don't, when they flower, unlike other basils, it's not the harbinger of the plant going south. Once they start blooming, even if you wanted to keep deadheading flower, debudding them, they keep budding again because they're just little flower machines, and the leaves stay vital, believe it or not. It's a good culinary plant, spicier, but a good culinary basil. And then you have, your oreganos. Oregano is in the mint family. You know what that means. It will travel everywhere. It gets big, it goes wide, it goes down deep, and you won't get rid of it. If you plant it in a small space, it'll be a problem. So you put it in a pot, Oh my God, it doesn't like it in a pot because it's a mint. It's a mint family. However, and so they come out with something called oregano compactum. But I typically like marjoram because it's a beautiful container plant anyway. Marjoram is just a sweeter version. It serves every culinary purpose for me that oregano does. And sometimes you can get a variegated version of marjoram that is just even prettier. You can replace your rosemary, which can be a thriller in a pot, an herb pot, with other things around it that like your purple basil, or you can make a really ornamental pot with rosemary as your thriller in the middle of the pot, or you can replace it with a prostrate variety. And there are as many prostrate varieties in Sabelico's herb tent as there are upright varieties, because they're not just popular from the point of view of taking up less space. They're also, I find, easier to winter over if you bring them in. That's just my experience. They're not as woody. The fifth category is the most fun one to me. It keeps the creativity surging. It's called Think Focal Point. And I'm going to end this presentation with a quiz, so pay attention. Focal point is important because it's not just the highlight of color or form that enhances your garden. It's much more. It's the way to help the eye have a starting point to take in the scene by giving it a place to start, from which one can appreciate even a nuanced garden site, because your eye needs a place to rest to start, and probably to finish too, but you know, the eye can just glaze over without a focal point. So focal point can be a plant of striking form or color, like this spike, this Dracaena in the middle of this garden. It can be a sculptural object. It can be an item used to support a planting. So for example, benches can be beautiful focal points to start the eye moving through a garden. Birdhouses, even if you're not inviting the birds in, a birdhouse ornamentally is a great place for the, excuse me, to start, as are bird baths. And by the way, they can be moved around depending on, you know, you don't have to keep it even in one season in one place. This is called a DIY. That's short for do it yourself. If you go on YouTube, do it yourself garden totem, TOTEM. You can use found objects to make your own focal point in a small garden. All you have to do is Google or go on YouTube and search for DIY garden totem. Lots of cute ideas. Teacups, using old teacups to stack is one of them. Now this quiz I end this presentation with is called Find the Focal Point. This one is easy, but it also tells you, it supports one of the themes, which is that you can use these structural objects, even like this beautiful gazing ball. Gazing balls are beautiful because of what you see right here. They reflect, as they did in Victorian times, they reflect the landscape. However, it's also supporting a plant that, two flowers here, that could go unnoticed in a plot of nothing else going on. Your eye could just glaze right over them. However, when this is put as a support for this hollyhock, it also gives the eye a place to start that celebrates that one lonely hollyhock. So this is a practice one. Find the focal point. I invite you, by the way, to take off your mute if you can help find the focal point in these slides. This one's easy. Somebody should be able to do this. This is a demonstration garden. Pat, I'm going to invite you because you're a master gardener, and you probably, this does no longer exist in our demonstration garden.
The bird bath?
That's right. It's a cracked bird bath that now no longer exists because it went through a couple of seasons and I think it fell apart. But it was cracked and brought in and planted with gray-green succulents, and became this, because of its elevation and its color, a really nice, and you can see it's late in the season because you can see this liatris is almost gone. It's getting to be late in the season, and yet this brings a nice cool color to the rest of the scene. Okay, how about this one? There are actually two. Two of you could be right.
The bronze circles.
This circle right here, this is a copper, and that's right, this is a copper, it used to be one of those twirling watering devices. It no longer works, but this is my lake house garden, one of my lake house gardens, a shade garden. Oh, this is where the quick fire is right now, because I have this huge bed of epimedium. And one thing that happens when you have a huge bed of something like this, even no matter how beautiful the plant, your eye glazes over because it's just too much of one thing. So I didn't have time to divide it or to move in a shrub until I parked that quick fire there. And so I just kind of plunged that into the ground. It's still there because it's fine. And my epimedium is fine too. But also this is a pot of cane begonia that I moved around because this is later in the season and my pink coneflowers didn't all come back. So I plugged this in and at one point actually put it back there. Portable color. This is actually the same thing, really. It's a vinca, your periwinkle, which is beautiful in May with all those blue flowers. But by later in the season, it's nice to have something else for the eye to appreciate. And this urn looks great in May when everything is blue. And then this coleus comes in. It's just coleus with a black sweet potato vine for contrast. But look what it does for that scene. Okay, here's one I took, I think at New York Botanical Garden. Can anybody figure out what the focal point is here?
The birds.
Oh, you outsmarted me. Most people start with the astilbes. And I say, yeah, the astilbes for 3 weeks in June. What about the rest of the season? These guys pick up the slack for the rest of the season. And if you notice, they're attracting your eye to this variegated hosta, which gives a different form and color to the rest of what it becomes, just green. This is tougher. The last couple are tough. Can you do it?
The purple flowers.
Purple.
Oh, you think, huh?
The fence.
You're getting close. Even without the fence, but you're right. Even without it's the fact that the fence is
path.
defining the
Structure.
curve. One of the things that yes, the curved path. If you're thinking of turning a backyard into a meadow, but you're worried about it looking messy and chaotic, consider this. The pollinators will love you if you do that. But all you have to do is to mow a path through it, and it gives the eye a place to start. If you put your hand up and just look at that meadow, it looks kind of, like I say, chaotic, unorganized, and your eye will not stop and take in the purple until it has a place to start. A curving line in a garden is a great way to give the eye a place to start. Is that for some reason our eyes love to rest on a curving line rather than a straight line. And here, for example, is a small garden version of this. If you do anything for your garden, if there's a mess back here, never mind the chair and the birdhouse, which are wonderful. But even if it's messy and you haven't deadheaded, if there's that clean line, that's where your eye starts. And for some reason, that garden all of a sudden looks neat and tidy because of that clean line with a mulch in the front. You don't have to mulch the rest of your garden if it's densely planted. You just have a little bit of mulch in the front with a clean line, and it looks tidy. And your eye will stop to appreciate what else is going on in there. This is like the picture I saw when it actually inspired the Power of Purple, my first presentation. Have you figured out what the focal point is?
It's got to be purple.
It's got to be purple. This is the, yeah, this is what I saw in Boston Common. My husband actually stopped and said, isn't that pretty? It was a springtime shot and it was just trees and shrubs, no flowers. And he's a guy who says, if it's not a flowering shrub, why have we got it? But he's looking at this green landscape and I said, oh, I know why you think it's, and I have people in Power Purple put up their hands to block out the Japanese maple in the middle, and it becomes a mass of green, just green. But if your eye has a place to start, you know, here at Berkshire Botanical Garden, they use purple, dark purple plants as contrast for that reason in almost every garden. This is a fine leaf hellebore, a close-up with some carex in the front. This here are annuals they plant. This is an alternanthera called Little Ruby, And we often have it in our plant sale. This starts out little like this and gets to be about, oh, they're like 12-inch mounds to 18-inch mounds. But that dark purple defines, I mean, that means that that hellebore has a new life come August because it's got that contrast in front of it. How about this one?
The fireplace, it looks.
Can you
sort of
see
like?
what that is? That's a mirror. That's a mirror. They define that little space with a mirror by hanging, but putting a mirror up on supports. And it gives depth to that space and it gives a place for the eye to start. And finally, this is the toughest one of all, and I'm sorry it's a little out of focus. This is from my Hopewell yard. This is the toughest one. This is the tricky one, and it's the one we end on. Can you do it?
Pond.
It is the pond, but it's more specific than the pond. It's more than the curving edge. It's more than the bright Japanese painted fern and Brunera that light up the shade. And the bleeding heart that, no, it's the water. It's the fact that you can't see, you cannot see that the water is moving. The focal point in this garden is the sound of moving water.
Wow.
This is a patio garden from Hopewell. This is just a 4-foot kidney shaped garden, pond that you buy, that we bought from Adams or someplace, and put into the ground with a little pump inside and hose that comes out underneath these rocks and recycles water, and it just drips. But the sound of water is so calming that in this patio, that lots of bad things can be going on in my gardens, but sitting on the patio, I can still be relaxed because that's my focal point. I have for you, I don't know why that just happened. I have the extra that I promised on my flyer. Because you've been a very good gardener this year, you should have some things on your Christmas list that help you in your small space gardens. And I've got 3 examples. I had an article in Dutchess Dirt last year that featured these 3 things, among others. And I'm going to be doing a new one for the December 1st issue of Dutchess Dirt with more tools of our favorite Master Gardener tools. I take polls. The winner of all my polls, people are still contributing this, in fact, even though I ran it in last year's article, is this knife right here called a Hori Hori knife, H-O-R-I, H-O-R-I. It's a Japanese name, Hori Hori knife. It's used, if you had nothing but these 3 things to cart around to your little gardens, you would eliminate half of what's in your garden cart now. Because this right here acts as a trowel, as you can cut string with it, you can prune things, you can weed, you can transplant. It does so many things that I now have a sheath for mine so I can have it around my waist so that I don't leave it places. These are called by our Master Gardener friend from Scotland with a Scottish accent, snips. They're snips, and the British Isles are called snips. In fact, if you Google snips, this is what you'll find. They're Fiskars. If you find them no place else, Fiskars has them in their displays in Lowe's and Home Depot. But you can also find them in the embroidery section of AC Moore and Michaels. Same things in the embroidery section, same things, but you have your 40% off coupon. And but if your husband is looking for something to get you for Christmas and doesn't want to set foot into the AC Moore embroidery section, send them to Home Depot and tell them Fiskars. This is called a garden trug. They come in lots of sizes. The smallest ones, start with the smallest one. It's probably the 14-inch size. You can take it out to the garden with your tools in it, or with mulch or compost in it, and then you empty it out there and you deadhead things and you carry it back with all your deadheaded stuff. Or you take it, it's a great watering device. You can take out water, and a gallon of water in the 14-incher only comes up to there. You squeeze the handles together, you take it out to your vegetable garden, you water from the pinched nose, because you've got both handles in one hand, you water from the nose until it's out, and then you take your snips and your Hori Hori knife and you harvest your vegetables and you bring them back in the trug. So these 3 things are my favorite things to give you for your holiday wish list this year. And that, I hope you have a wonderful holiday. And next year you have another year to enjoy your small spaces.
Thank you so much. I have 2 questions. So Mary Lyon would like to know, what type of plants can you use in a screened-in porch? What plants would be best for that?
Interesting. I have lots of plants in my screen and porch. Um, in containers, of course. But I have lots of different kinds of containers because screen and porch is where you're really talking about close-up value, close-up visual value. And that's where I put things that not only are annuals, and your shade annuals, you're talking about your shade annuals, all the begonias do very well. I have a whole presentation on begonias because there's so many different types of begonias. They do very well there. But all kinds of shade annuals do. But I tend to use my porch for things that come in from the house, meaning they're in ceramic planters, so they're not going to be out for the winter anyway. They come in from the house, from house plants status, they become screened in porch status. And that includes many of the begonias. And it includes things like ivies. And again, think about what I showed you on the dock, which is the thriller, filler, and spiller. So you get different kinds of shapes and textures and colors in your shade plantings on your porch. And by the way, if you've got sun on your porch, it's probably morning sun, and most shade plants do very well with morning sun.
And that's a key point, Chris. With any space, you first have to see how many hours of sun you have. And with a screened porch, that's cutting down the intensity of the sun. So starting from shade. Remember the diagnostics master gardener meeting we had where Johanna sent in what's wrong with this plant, and it was a tomato plant that was trying to be grown on a shade, on a screened patio, and it's not going to work because there's not enough sun.
Right.
So you really have to think shade.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Excellent.
question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Anna, did you have another question from chat? Or
I answered one in the chat when you were talking about getting rid of plants, and I shared that we used to share plants, but now with concerns about jumping worms, we don't.
Oh, okay.
Because of moving cocoons. So yeah, you find another place for it, or
Another
you
topic.
split it in half and replant one and get rid of the other half.
You give that talk, don't you, Joyce, on jumping worms?
Yes, ma'am.
If people were to request, I'm sure Anna is the adult programming person at LaGrange. Anna, you probably welcome requests from people to know what people are
definitely.
interested in. So
Certainly.
go ahead and ask away. And I will send you the follow-up handouts for this class tomorrow.
That would be great.
Okay.
And I will send the recording tomorrow when I have possibility to download it. So I'm going to end the
Thank you
recording.
so much.
Okay.
Both on the same one. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Chris.
Love
thank
LaGrange.
you.
Great.
Love
Thanks so
LaGrange,
much,
and good luck
Chris.
with your move, everybody.
Thank you. I'm
Thank
so
you.
excited. Have a great